What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. Yesterday, I gave you the 10 biggest surprise teams from the 2020 season. Now we're going to give you the 10 biggest disappointments from the 2020 college football season. There were a lot to choose from, a lot of teams that had very high expectations that wound up having just terrible years. I think a lot of that was because of COVID and just because of the different off season. I think it just kind of messed some things up for some teams. Maybe some teams were going to be bad anyways. Maybe we just didn't realize it. The opt-outs obviously hurt a lot of teams. So it was a crazy year. It was obvious we were going to see some disappointments, but there were some that just really surprised me. And again, keep in mind, this is a top 10 list. I can't keep adding more and more teams. There were more than 10 disappointments, just like there were more than 10 surprise teams. I got a lot of teams on that, or comments on that video about teams like Indiana, Iowa State. Yeah, those teams were surprise teams, but for me personally, I expected them to have really good years, so I wasn't shocked, that Indiana did what they did or Iowa State did what they did. Yeah, that was a little bit better than I thought, but it wasn't a huge surprise. So we're ranking these teams based off of how big that disappointment was, and really looking at my personal thoughts on these teams, my expectations for these teams, but also just kind of looking at the big picture as well, just what most people thought about the teams as well. So let's get right into it. Our top 10 biggest disappointments from the 2020 college football season. Number 10 is Minnesota. Minnesota was a team coming into this year. A lot of people picked this team to win the Big Ten West. Really thought that I thought they were right there probably with Wisconsin among the top two contenders in the Big Ten West. They were 11-2 in 2019, just 3-4 in 2020. And just like I said on yesterday's video, this isn't just about the records. We're not just looking at who had the biggest drop off from their record in 2019. I just am showing that to kind of give you something to maybe to look at here. But it was just not a good year for Minnesota, and it really started in that first game against Michigan, a Michigan team that wound up being terrible this year. Minnesota's a team that got better, and a lot of these teams you're going to see on this list, especially in the Big Ten, they got better as the season progressed. So Minnesota didn't finish the year as a terrible team, but still, the fact that they were not even in contention for the Big Ten West, it was a surprise. It was a disappointment for me. Knew that defense was going to be an issue for them coming into this year. They lost so much, but I thought the offense was good enough that they'd be able to win a majority of their games, and it just didn't happen. And again, Minnesota, rough year in 2020. We'll see how they bounce back next year. Number 9, Virginia Tech. Big disappointment for me. They were just 5-6 this year, 8-5 last year. I expected this team to get better. I thought Hendon Hooker was going to be really good for them. He's now gone, transferred. And, I know they had a lot of issues with COVID, but it actually seemed like, maybe it's just me, but it almost seemed like this team played better early in the year when they had all those players out. Then they didn't really finish very strong. So, yeah, it was just a rough year for Virginia Tech. This is a team that I thought was a dark horse contender in the ACC. I didn't pick them to go to the ACC championship or anything, but I thought they were a top-tier ACC team, and it did not play out that way. They just did not have a good year. Again, maybe COVID played a big part in that, especially early on with all the players that they had out, but still, it was a disappointment, and they're at number 9 on my list. At number 8, it's UCF, and I think the big reason why they're on this list is because of opt-outs. They had a ton of opt-outs, and then about halfway through the season, they had some guys get in trouble and get kicked off the team. So they really just didn't have the roster. Given what they wound up having on their roster at the end of the year, I probably was not a huge disappointment to finish 6-4. But coming into this year, after a 10-2 year and a lot of guys back, I thought that they were the favorites in the American Conference. I picked them to win this conference, but just without those guys, they just didn't have the roster to get it done. Still had a good year at 6-4, but I think it was a disappointment just because they didn't even get to the American Championship game. I thought they would at least finish in the top 2, but because of those opt-outs, it just didn't work out for them, and they were a disappointment. They were at number 8 for me. Number 7 is LSU, a team that I wasn't really sure if they should be on this list or not. So if you just look at the record, they finished 5-5. I predicted them to go 6-4. Not really much of a drop there. They did about what I thought they would record-wise. But again, this is a team that just went 15-0, just won the national championship, and it wasn't necessarily the record. It was just how they played in these games. They were in close games against bad teams in the SEC. They were not competitive at all against the better teams in the SEC, except maybe Florida. And they did finish pretty strong. You know, they played A&M pretty tough. But when you look at the Alabama game, when you look at the Auburn game, I mean, Auburn wound up not being a great team. They were terrible in that game. Got blown out. Mississippi State in week 1, there were some big disappointments for LSU. So, again, it's not necessarily the 5-5 record. It's just the competitiveness of this team, especially in the first half of the year. Again, they did build some momentum late. They're going to carry that momentum into next year. And LSU, I think, has a chance to maybe be the second team, maybe third team in the SEC West next year. Maybe even better than that. We'll see. Some transfers could help them out, and that's going to be very interesting this offseason to see which teams can bring in transfers that can make an immediate impact. Let's go to number 6 now. They're on this list every year, it seems like. It's Florida State. They were 3-6 in 2020. Remember that first drive against Georgia Tech in their opener? And it was so exciting because I think it was really the first game of the year where there was a pretty good crowd, and it felt like college football. And they went right down the field, and it looked like Florida State was going to be pretty good this year. Remember that? Well, then they had a weather delay, and Georgia Tech came back and wound up winning that game, and it was just all downhill. After that weather delay, it was all downhill for Florida State. Now, they did beat North Carolina, pulled off a big upset there, so there were some high points for Florida State, but still, this team was way too talented to go 3-6. A disappointing year. They were 6-7 the year before. Mike Norvell, his first year, I know they've had a lot of coaching turnover, so maybe they can maybe get some consistency moving forward. But again, it was a disappointing year. Not a team that I thought would finish at the top of the ACC, but I thought they would be better than 3-6. Thought they would at least be in the top half of that conference. But again, it was a very rough year for the Seminoles. Let's go to number 5 now. Tennessee. Tennessee finishes 3-7 in 2020. They were 8-5 in 2019. Remember, they won all those games in a row at the end? And everybody thought Tennessee was going to be great this year. Most people had them in the top 25. I did not. You can go look at my preseason top 25 polls. I did not have Tennessee in my top 25. I did not expect this team to compete in the SEC East, but I thought they would do better than 3-7. A very rough year for Tennessee. And if you go back to my preseason evaluation on this team, I said it's going to come down to the quarterback position. If they get good quarterback play, they have the pieces, they have enough to where they can be one of the better teams in the SEC, but I still said they were clearly not going to beat Florida or Georgia or pass them in the East. And I said if the quarterback play was not good, they were not going to be very good, and that's exactly what happened. Quarterback play really was never good for Tennessee. They've got a lot of issues. I don't really know why they were so bad this year. Again, I thought they would be better than this, even though I wasn't as high on this team as most people. 3-7 is just not going to get it done when you've got the talent that Tennessee has. Again, I know it was an all-SEC conference schedule. If you play some easy non-conference games, this team with an 8-game SEC schedule still could have finished 6-6, but that, again, would have been a disappointment coming off of an 8-5 year. Number 4 was Cal, and this is a tough one. I really wasn't sure where they should be on this list or if I should have them on this list. They finished 1-3. I think they were better than their record. But this is a team that I did expect to be in the top 25, a team that I thought would challenge Oregon in the Pac-12 North. They did beat Oregon. I predicted that in my original preseason predictions. I didn't have them winning the North, but I did have them upsetting Oregon. They did that, but they lost their other 3 games. A couple of them were really close. I think the biggest disappointment for Cal is just the fact that they only played 4 games. So we really didn't find out how good this team was. And again, it's kind of tough to figure out where to put them on this list. But just because I had this team towards the top of the Pac-12 and they finished towards the bottom of the Pac-12, I think they've got to be on this list. And speaking of Oregon, you're not going to see them on this list. They were a disappointment because they lost a couple of games there to teams that they really should have beat. But they still won the Pac-12 championship. So if you're wondering about Oregon and where they finished, well, look, they still won the Pac-12, so it was still a decent year for them. Yes, they were a disappointment overall, but winning the Pac-12, not a disappointment. And so, again, they're not in the top 10, even though, yeah, I would probably put them, if we were doing a top 15 team list, I might have Oregon on there. But Cal at number 4. Let's go to number 3 now. Louisville. 4-7 in 2020. They were 8-5 in 2019. This one really came out of nowhere for me. I thought this was a very good football team. I thought they would be one of the more explosive offenses in the ACC. I knew they'd have some question marks on defense, but they had question marks last year and still went 8-5. This is a team that I thought was a dark horse contender in the ACC. I thought they might actually could get to the ACC championship because of the way their schedule set up. It was a really good schedule for them. They didn't have to play Clemson, but it was not a good year for this team at all. Horrible year. 4-7. Scott Satterfield, you have to wonder now, where does he go from here? Thought this team, this program was heading in the right direction, but after this year, there are a lot of question marks going into this offseason. So we'll see if they can bounce back or if they're going to go back to kind of being what they were in previous years, which was not very good. Number 2 is Michigan. Michigan 2-4 in 2020, coming off a 9-4 season. It would have been even worse, especially if they had played Ohio State. The record could have been 2-5. This is a team that was just terrible this year. There's no other way to put it. They were not a good football team. The defense was not good. The offense was not good. There was really nothing good about this Michigan team. It was just a huge disappointment. Huge disappointment. I know they had, some guys that went out early in the year on the offensive line. They had some injuries, and if this team was at full strength, maybe they play a little bit better. Maybe they at least go 3-3. But when you come into the season expected to be a top 15 team, maybe, I think 2-4 is just not going to get it done. Rough year for Michigan. Jim Harbaugh, I think, is now on the hot seat. They're still going to give him a contract extension or whatever, but if he has another bad year next year, I think he's going to be on the hot seat. But we'll see what happens with that. Michigan is just in a rough place right now. They seem like they're never going to pass Ohio State, never going to beat them. I don't know. Maybe they never will, or I guess someday they will, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. Another disappointing year, but this year it was a big disappointment, just 2-4. Rough year for the Wolverines. Let's go to number 1 now. Let's see if you guys have figured it out. You probably have. This is a team that I thought was a playoff contender, maybe a dark horse playoff contender, but I thought they had a shot to make it to the college football playoff, and they had a losing record. Penn State, the biggest disappointment of the 2020 college football season. They go 4-5. They were 11-2 in 2019. Had some momentum coming into this year. Had a lot of guys coming back. And again, I thought it was a team that was right there behind Ohio State, and if they could pull off an upset in that game, they had a real shot to make the college football playoff. It didn't happen, and I think it all started when Micah Parsons opted out, and then Journey Brown couldn't play because of his medical issue. You lose probably your 2 best players, and still, I thought this team had enough to where they would have a good year, maybe lose a couple of games, but 4-5, this was a rough one. They started horrible. Now, they did finish strong. They won. I believe they lost their first 5 and then won their last 4 games in a row. So they did get some momentum, and I think it just shows you how much the disruptions, especially in the offseason, played a part in this season. And the teams that didn't handle it very well, like Penn State, like Michigan, I guess, they just didn't have great years. It was a disappointment for them. This Penn State team had no business going 4-5. They're way too talented to be 4-5, and to me, they were the biggest disappointment of this college football season. What do you guys think? I know there's going to be some teams that you think should be on here that I didn't list, so give me those teams. Who do you think? I know on the surprise teams, everyone was talking about Indiana and Iowa State. And depending on what your expectations were for those teams, I could definitely see those teams making it. So maybe there's a team here that you had high expectations for. Maybe I didn't, but maybe you did, and they just had a disappointing year. So give me your teams down in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.